Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Feel free anytime, Goshtakor, if you'd like to add something to what I'll say, feel any time to interrupt me and stop me and share what you'd like to say. Today, we're concluding the Isopanisad. These conclude the last 4 verses of Isopanisad are prayers by the author, Srila Vyasadeva. And we saw the previous 2 verses, how he's talking about he wants to see beyond the dazzling effulgence of the Lord and wants to see his face. And today he wants to surrender to the Lord and go towards him and asking the Lord's help for removing all hindrances on the path. So the previous 2 verses really talked about the supreme destination, the supreme goal, which is to see Krishna face to face. In that concept of the highest concept of the absolute truth, of the supreme personality of Godhead, beyond the Paramatma feature of the absolute truth and beyond the personal effulgence feature of the absolute truth. So we are talking about the supreme goal. But today, these last 2 verses talk more about the supreme process of bhakti. So Bhagavan, Krishna, the supreme personal God, is the supreme goal, and bhakti is the supreme process. Because there's 3 things. There's Bhagavan, bhakti, and the bhakta. Bhakti, bhakta is the devotee who practices bhakti, and Bhagavan is the object of that devotion. And one who practices bhakti develops an intimate, the bhakta develops an intimate connection with Bhagavan, Shri Krishna. And that's pretty much the substance of these verses. And we're going to go in detail on this. And I'm going to remind everybody about what we said at the beginning. I said it was the thread of the whole Isopanisad. And I haven't mentioned it much, but I'm going to mention it now, is that we are limited and imperfect, and the Lord is unlimited and perfect. He knows everything we have done, and he can correct any wrongdoings to make us perfect. In other words, we're imperfect, but he can make us perfect. And that's kind of the substance of these, if I was going to summarize quickly these 2 verses. So I'm going to recite mantra 17. Let this temporary body be burnt to ashes, and let the air of life be merged with the totality of air. Now, O my Lord, please remember all my sacrifices, and because you are the ultimate beneficiary, please remember all that I have done for you. And Purport Prabhupada starts by explaining the process of transmigration of the soul, which is being hit on at the beginning of the verse here. You know, that he's leaving this temporary body. You know, this at the moment of death, he wants to join the Supreme Lord, join the abode of the Supreme Lord. So he's preparing for death. Let this body be burned to ashes, this temporary body, And then the next verse he's talking, let there not be interest, so I can go towards you. And Prabhupada spends a good time talking about how the spirit soul is indestructible within the body and just covered by a material dress. And there's an interesting point that he says here, and I often use that as an example to describe the human form of life and to describe how the material body has senses because the spirit soul has senses. And I often find myself using that example, but I always wondered where it was coming from. You know, I probably heard it somewhere, but now I found it. I found this, and I was happy to find the actual reference in scripture, because it's always nice when we quote, when we speak, that we speak on the basis of scripture, but it's not where exactly are those things mentioned. So I know I was using often this example, but it's like, where did I get this from? Where did I got this example from? And of course, I often elaborate. I often elaborate on this example, but all that to say that I was happy to find it. So Prabhupada saying that this material body is a foreign dress on the spirit soul, and actually the material body, the material covering is formless, but it takes shape according to the form of the indestructible person. In other words, the spirit soul has senses, and therefore the body has senses. And the example is like if you have a glove will have 5 fingers because the hand has 5 fingers. What it covers, it has a similar shape. And yes, there's mittens that are cover the whole hand, but it more or less looks like a hand. Either a mitten or a glove, it looks like a hand because it's covering the hand. So these material bodies, they have senses because the spirit soul has senses. And in the human form of life, it's less of a covering. You know, just like, for example, if I put my hand in a box, you know, you just see the box moving. You know there's something in there, but you're not so sure what it is. So that's a big covering. But if I just put a piece of glove, then it has 5 fingers and it really looks like a hand. So that's of a lesser covering. So the material body is like a lesser covering. The human form of life is like a lesser covering for the spirit soul. Yes, other forms of life, like animal life, it's a stronger covering. Even stronger is plant life, where they're not moving. Like a tree has life, but you know the symptoms of consciousness are not that great. They're still there, but not that great. They're not as great as in the human form of life. So this idea that the human form of life is a lesser covering and there's more consciousness there, like the glove only covering the hand compared to a box. It exhibits more closeness to the spirit soul. Not that my spiritual form necessarily looks like what I am here in this material body that I have now as Damodar Paket in this material world. But it has senses like the spirit soul. And material nature, it works so well that it gives the body that we deserve for the type of enjoyment that we have. Every person that's in their particular body is because they had some sort of desire. Either it was good or bad for them, but they had that desire, and a mix of all types of desires or to enjoy in a certain way, but material nature provided that body according to one's also karma, but also one's desire was there to give the body that was necessary for that particular enjoyment. And that's the way of the transmigration of the soul. What one does throughout one's life, what one cultivates throughout one's life, all of that culminates in a thought at the time of death. And then, like at the time of death, our next body is already ready. Material nature has it arranged. Okay, all this life you've cultivated this, the culmination of your whole life is your death. And then, okay, it's like you're ready, you've been prepared for this next destination. And then that's where you're going. Once the soul transmigrates, he's cultivating to go somewhere else. And if we prepare ourselves in our spiritual life, then it can culminate to the transference back to our spiritual body. So we're gonna transmigrate. The soul's gonna transmigrate. This body is temporary. Either he's gonna go to a spiritual body or a material body, and we prefer, of course, to go to a spiritual body. So what we cultivate is what we'll get in our next life. Just as what we cultivate now in our life is what we're enjoying right now is just the cultivation of what we've been cultivating in our lives in the past. So death is just a change of dress. But this thing is that we might practice, Krishna consciousness. And the goal is to think of Krishna all the time, so that at the time of death, we can think of Krishna. And the idea is that we have to practice now when we're healthy and we have a sharp mind, because we don't know at the time of death what are going to be our situation, There's so many diseases there when we get old, and some people have Alzheimer, and sometimes, we have dementia, and there's other maybe mental illness that's there. Our mental health also goes down. And we might not be capable, although we've cultivated Christian consciousness in our life, we might not be capable of doing that. So this idea that, remember all that I have done for you, that's the prayer that Vyasadeva is asking here. I've all done all these things for you, so don't forget. We might forget Krishna at the time of death, but he will not forget. This is the idea, is that we might be imperfect, but Krishna is perfect, and he can make us perfect. So he won't forget. And then there's this very interesting quote by Prabhupada. It's not by Prabhupada, but it's from Krishna, but Prabhupada is quoting that in this relationship, that the Lord doesn't forget. And he talks about, and this is how Prabhupada he prefaces this quote from the Bhagavad Gita as, the devotee is intimately related to the Lord. And this is how Prabhupada, and this is the quote from Bhagavad Gita. So I'm going to read the whole quote, and then we're going to discuss that. Even if one commits the most abominable action, if he is engaged in devotional service, he is to be considered saintly because he is properly situated in his determination. He quickly becomes righteous and attains lasting peace. O son of Kunti, declare it boldly that my devotee never perishes. O son of Rita, those who take shelter in me though they be of lower birth, women, Vaishyas, or Sudras, can attain the supreme destination. How much more this is so of the righteous Brahmanas, the devotees, and the saintly kings. Therefore, having come to this temporary, miserable world, engage in loving service unto me. Engage your mind always in thinking of me. Become my devotee, offer obeisances to me and worship me. Being completely absorbed in me, surely you will come to me. And I want to touch about a few points on this, and actually in the rest of the purport, Prabhupada elaborates on this idea of, even if a devotee commits the most abominable action, it is a big topic to discuss about that. And Krishna says he's still saintly. But before that, I want to take a little time to talk about, there's a section here that irritates people now these days. The mention, of the idea that people can be of a lower birth, and there's certain categories there. It talks about women, Vaishyas, and Sudras. It seems like unjust. How come, a little bit misogynist, especially the part about women. But let's look at from a philosophical perspective, and actually Krishna is mentioning that one is born in a situation according to his karma, and there could be favorable positions and unfavorable. There could, like, a person can be born rich, a person can be born poor, a person can be born educated, a person can be born in a family that's not educated. All that is according to our good and past deeds. And I remember at one point watching a show, and there was somebody saying, I think it was a reality show, like it was like an interview thing or something, and this person was saying, the mother was saying to his daughter, like, you're black, you're a lesbian, and you're a woman, like, you'll be discriminated a lot throughout your life. Like, her position is such that, it's a difficult position. And the reality of this world is that, we might have all these feminist movement, but throughout history, women has always been in a vulnerable position. There's a lot of, with the Me Too movement, there's a lot of, like, that's not new. I mean, it's just coming out, but there's an oppression that's there. And it's been going on ever since the material world is there. So in that sense, people see that as, Krishna is just saying women are lower or something like that. No, he's just acknowledging that it's not necessarily an easy position to be in. And I cannot talk from experience, but I hear from my wife, like her experiences in life, and just the fact of being a woman, it's not an easy position. So the main point also that Krishna is saying is that no matter what our position is, either it might be materially good, materially bad, whatever, you can still attain perfection. That's the main point that Krishna is saying here. And I just wanted to spend some time on that because, people read that, it's in the scripture. This is at the end of the 9th chapter. And people might use that in a bad way or misunderstand in a bad way. And so I just wanted to shed light on that. I hope I did it properly. So back to this idea that if one commits the most abominable action, he's still to be considered saintly. And the word that's being used there in that verse from 9 chapter to 30th verse of the Bhagavad Gita is sudurachara, which means a really misbehaved person. You know, you really misbehaved. And there's a quote here from Bhakti Thakur, a great saint in our line, who's explaining that. He's trying to explain why could a devotee be misbehaved? You know, we don't, like a devotee should not be misbehaved. But even if he is, he's on the right path. And that's what you have to understand. This is not a license to be misbehaved, but it's the idea that bhakti is so powerful that even if a person somehow makes mistakes, he will be rectified. A devotee is on the right path of the saints. I'm quoting Bhakti Thakur. The devotee is on the right path of the saints, even if it seems to be of loose character. And Prabhupada was quoting Bhakti Thakur. He was saying there's two things. There's like two parallel lines that a conditioned soul who's practicing spiritual life has to do two things. So there's activities for self-realization on one line, and there's the bodily maintenance on the other one. Conditioned soul cannot give this up. And he classifies social status, mental development, cleanliness, austerity, nourishment, struggle for existence. I think that means like earning one's livelihood. All that are part of the bodily maintenance, or maintenance of the body. And then, and self-realization is one's occupation as a devotee, and also the actions of bhakti, as we're going to see, were described after this. And there's, even if there's an occasional, so there's these two parallel lines. And sometimes if the devotee spends too much time on the bodily maintenance, it won't be too much of it at the beginning. It might not be too much of a problem, because it's going to be rectified with time. So an occasional exhibition of worldliness will not be, should not be a source of too much concern, as long as he's determined to stay on the path. But this idea also of self-realization and bodily maintenance, they are they're proportionate. I mean, the more you advance in spiritual life, the less bodily maintenance you need. And the less advanced you are in spiritual life, the more bodily maintenance you need. Yeah, they negate each other proportionately. In mathematics, we have a term for that. It's like a negative correlation. You know, one goes high, the other goes low, like that. They have a relationship like that. So I'll read this next quote there from Prabhupada, who's quoting Bhakti Thakur, and then I want to show something. This helps me. I like to see things visually. Helps me like that. But it should be noted that such worldliness cannot continue for long, because by the grace of the Lord, such imperfections will come to an end very shortly. Bhakti, or devotional service to the Lord, is the only right path. If we're on the right path, even occasional occurrence of worldliness does not hamper one in the advancement of self-realization. Let me show you. This is just I like to visualize it. So this idea of bodily maintenance, or let's say sense gratification, and self-realization are opposite to each other. Right here, everybody sees the screen here. They're opposite to each other. So as one progresses in bhakti, sorry, I didn't meant to do that. As one progresses in bhakti, bodily maintenance, it should lower. And let's say these dots are like actions that you do, or let's say it's a week that you had, let's say it's a month or even a year. Huh? You had a year where you felt you did better in spiritual life, but you did a little more sense creation. And hopefully it goes down like this, huh? As your life progresses, your bhakti increases and your body maintenance diminishes. That's the other, or at least as one progresses in bhakti, one's body maintenance diminishes. And that's the idea. But then, one point you did a big mistake, you blundered. To err is human. And there it is. Big mistake appears. Everybody sees the big mistake here? Huh? You're still performing bhakti. It's like you're getting advanced there in bhakti here. But, it's a level of sense gratification you didn't know you're capable of, So you did a big mistake there. So if you look at all these dots and these stats, and you look at all the activities you've done, and these dots here, all the activities you've done, this year it's, and we even have in mathematics, it's like it's a stat that you don't really, it's a data that you don't really consider because it doesn't represent the tendency. The tendency throughout your life has been that you've decreased your sense gratification. The tendency in your life that you've increased your bhakti and decreased sense gratification. But there was like a big mistake there. So you don't consider that. So same thing, philosophically, we can understand, or theologically, we can understand that Krishna, he forgets that, he forgets, he's correcting that big mistake, it still lingers there. And that's why we need to pray to Krishna that he completely erases it and forgets it. But it might happen. Not that we plan for it, not that we want it, but it shouldn't be a source for us to be discouraged and to not continue. And that big mistake may be a lifetime, actually. Like there's a story of Ajamil. He was a nice Brahmana, devotee, had a nice life, but he fell down with a prostitute, and his whole life he was living like that. By the end of his life, somehow he had some piety, and he named the son Ajamil. He named his son Narayan. Ajamil was his name. Named his son Narayan. At the end of life, he was very attached to his son, so he said, Narayan! But he was such a sinful person. But the Vishnu Dutas, the messengers of Vishnu came to protect him from the messengers of Yamaraj, the Yamadutas. They wanted to bring them to hell, but he says, no, he chanted the name of Narayan. His whole life was sinful, but he had done lots of pious activity and lots of spiritual progress before. And there's so many stories like that of the Mahabharata, how devotees fall short. But there's a danger to this verse, is that we shouldn't misapply it, that, I can do any nonsense I want and then I'll be forgiven. That's an offense in itself. But if it happens because of weakness, one should pray for the Lord to have it removed. And the Lord within the heart is gonna get rid of that. But we have to be careful also of applying this idea in like this idea cannot be institutionalized. In the sense that if somebody does something wrong, he'll have to get punished. Like if a devotee, let's say we're in a society of devotees, and if the devotee, like he's a nice devotee, and somehow like he went totally crazy and he killed somebody, like it's the most abominable action. He killed somebody. He should not be exempt from punishment. society has rules and people have to follow them, and people need to be punished for the wrongs they do. But philosophically, theologically, we can understand that his relationship with Krishna is something else. So socially, we have to act upon it. We cannot use this idea that, oh, because Krishna forgives him, that we cannot have rules in society. That doesn't work like that. And that's often the problem in the religious institutions, is that people like this idea of mercy and compassion, and they apply this for people who are in positions of power and they do horrible stuff. No, they should be punished. This principle cannot be institutionalized, or else the institution becomes weak. Right? The institution has to set an example, or else you're just kind of encouraging this behavior. And there's like stories of Lord Chaitanya. Of Lord Chaitanya's one devotee transgressed very little, Chota Haridas, little transgression, but he was very severe. It was very severe in his punishment, because he was the head of the institution, Lord Chaitanya, of his movement. And it's explained here that Bhakti Siddhanta says the reason why Lord Chaitanya was so severe like that is because he wanted to set an example. He wanted his devotees to be strict in that way. So we have to be careful with that this idea, it's a philosophical idea, it's a theological idea, it's between the devotee and Krishna, but we still have to act in a social setting that, if a person does something wrong, he has to be punished, unfortunately. But does that punishment, or does that mistake of him bar him from attaining perfection? No, it doesn't. Well, we still have our rules in society. I just wanted to highlight that point, because sometimes I feel this might be misapplied in the social setting. But this idea is that the impersonalists, even if they're perfect, ultimately it's worth nothing. Well, I mean, yes, they joined the Brahmajyoti, but it's not the best result they're getting anyways. So even the perfect impersonalist doesn't get the best result. You as an impersonalist, but a personalist, a devotee of the Lord, even if he's imperfect, like the lowest devotee is greater than any karmi, any jnani. Because why? Not necessarily because of the greatness of the devotee, it's because of the greatness of the path of bhakti. And this is what this is all highlighting, is that bhakti is the supreme path. Even if one performs it imperfectly, he still will attain better results than any other path. And ultimately, if one starts bhakti, ultimately Krishna will help him to continue and to make further progress. So that all this is highlighting the supremacy of bhakti, which is actually what is going to be discussed at the beginning of the Nectar of Devotion, which we're coming after. And it kind of starts. It's great because where we end with Isopanisad is where we start with Nectar of Devotion. So this idea of bhakti is that we want to have constant contact with the Lord. And what is bhakti? There's mainly there are 9 activities of bhakti. It's hearing and chanting about the glories of the Lord, remembering the Lord, serving his lotus feet, offering prayers to the Lord, worshiping the Lord, serving him, and becoming his friend, and surrendering everything to him. We can elaborate on all of them. There's so much to say on all of them, but we're just having an overview of them here, and we can practice them all together or one by one. Parikshit attained perfection just by hearing. He's the hearer of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Sukadeva Goswami, the speaker of Srimad Bhagavatam, he attained perfection by speaking. And there's so like that, there's so many examples where a devotee, he just absorbed himself in one, he attained perfection from just one item of devotional service. And they're also all related. When one does often, they're mixed. When one does one, he does the others as well. But even if you dedicate yourself to one, you can attain perfection. That's how powerful they are. And the greatest hearing and chanting was Parikshit Maharaj and Sukadeva Goswami, in which is the Bhagavatam. And it's this Bhagavatam that is the best thing to hear and to chant. You know? All these, I mean, we're reading the Isopanisad, we're going to read the Nectar of Devotion. All these are actually in the purports, are all based on the Srimad Bhagavatam. Also the Nectar of Devotion we're going to read, they're all based on Srimad Bhagavatam. It's our main scripture by which all the other scriptures are elaborated upon. And in the Srimad Bhagavatam, when Parikshit, he starts asking questions to Sukadeva Goswami, he asks, what's the duty of a person that's about to die? And then Prabhupada says, you know, it's a very good question, but the reality is that we don't know when we're going to die. Now we think we're going to die when we're old, but we don't know. We might die tomorrow, might die, you know. So in other words, it's what's the duty of a person about to die? What's the duty? It's everybody's duty, you know. What this person should do all the time. And he said one should always, Sukadeva Goswami's replies, one should always hear, glorify, and remember the Lord. One should therefore not indulge in hearing, and Prabhupada writes, one should therefore not indulge in hearing and speaking rubbish activities of worldly politicians like Donald Trump and so-called big man in society, but should mold his life in such a way that he can engage in godly activities without wasting a second. Sri Isopanisad directs us towards such godly activities. So that's our goal. Our goal is to get to this bhakti path here, right here, this bhakti where there's no more bodily maintenance of sense gratification. But you know, in the progress, we might fluctuate between bodily maintenance and self-realization. But okay, unless one is accustomed to practice spiritual life, how can he do it at the time of death? Unless one is accustomed to think of Krishna, how can he do at the time of death? So we practice during our lifetime to do it. And then the next verse continues in the same train of thought. All right, I might go a little bit over here because there's a lot there. Oh my Lord, as powerful as fire, O omnipotent one, now I offer you all obeisances, following on the ground at your feet. Oh my Lord, please lead me on the right path to reach you. And since you know all that I have done in the past, please free me from the reactions to my past sins so that there will be no hindrances, so there will be no hindrance to my progress. So he wants to reach the Lord, but he know there might be impediments, and he wants the Supreme Lord to remove them. And he says, as powerful as fire. You know, powerful fire can burn anything. So the Supreme Lord can burn any sinful reactions that we have in our past. So again, I'm repeating the refrain of the Sri Isopanisad here, is that we are limited and imperfect. The Lord is unlimited and perfect, and he can correct us and make us perfect. Dr. Corey, you wanted to say something? You're raising your hand, or?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the nice point you made in class about the most abnormal action from a devotee, but ultimately it's not an hindrance. So on the same line, there's different impetus to behave properly. One of them is that if you behave properly, you're going to become happy. And another impetus is that you behave properly, you're following the scriptures properly, you get the satisfaction of following the authorities properly is another impetus to behave properly. But the real reason why we will behave properly is Krishna himself. He's the real motivation for us to behave properly. When we hear about Krishna's glory, like Krishna's Bhagavan, the person who is opulent in full belief, knowledge, full strength, etc., his entourage is associated and his abode are imbued with these 6 opulence. So it makes Krishna a very desirable goal, that if reached, Krishna association is the highest perfection of life. So hearing about Krishna and Krishna himself is the biggest impetus to behave properly. And ultimately is the reason why we will behave properly, because we develop a desire to get away from this lazy material world and join Krishna and his eternal activities in the spiritual world, where we belong. That's the verdict of the Bhagavatam. So we have to keep always the goal and focus that the goal of our devotional life ultimately is to have Krishna's darshan, like you said, is the highest goal, having Krishna's vision. Because to know Krishna means to see Krishna. If you see Krishna, you know Krishna. If you never saw Krishna, you don't really know what he is like. But as soon as he revealed himself in his physical form to us, then we will understand Krishna. So basically, that's why the Bhagavatam is so important, because the 10th of the Bhagavatam describe Krishna's qualities, Krishna's entourage, Krishna's everything. So as soon as we develop a taste for envisioning ourselves as part of these activities, that is the greatest impetus to give our lacking, or to give our weaknesses, eventually we will do that.
Thank you, Prabhu, for stressing that point. That we might,
because at the same time, like other religion, because they have an imperfect description of spiritual abode, because they lack detailed description of the spiritual world looks like and what the Lord looks like, people are not sure about going there because they don't really know where they're going. And because they're experiencing pleasure in the material world on a daily basis through sense gratification, they think, well, I know what I'm getting now as far as pleasure is concerned. Why should I risk that to go somewhere where I don't really know what's going on there? So therefore, the religion that are not personal about description of the qualities of the Lord, they fall short, and people who adhere to this religion, they don't have the strength to cut themselves away, break loose of that attachment to sense gratification. So impersonalism, being impersonal regarding spiritual affairs, is an impetus to greater sense gratification, to greater involvement in the spiritual world. So unless you know the personality of God as described in the Vaishnava literature in great details, you won't have much to come from sense gratification. Like follow the 4 regs: no meeting, no intoxication, no illicit sex, no gambling. Why are we able to follow? Because there's a promise of associating this wonderful, incredible person, Krishna, and we know what's waiting for us. Therefore, we're willing to take the path because we realize there's no risk involved. I'm going to give up something inferior to get something much superior. So knowledge of the goal is very important in spiritual life.
And like I like what you said at the beginning, one might behave properly out of obligation, there's some sort of satisfaction that there's an amount of sense of satisfaction that comes from, okay, doing what you're obliged to do, or like being responsible and doing the right thing. The satisfaction comes from that. But higher than that is you do something out of love for Krishna, and you that satisfies much more your soul, and you'll behave properly automatically if you act out of love for Krishna. You know, and that's a way higher goal that we want, and we want to develop that love for Krishna, and then we won't behave improperly. And that's what Prabhupada explains in the purport, that the karmis, like, this is the chance to perform sinful activities, and this is the progress of self-realization. Yeah? A karmi, it's very easy. A karmi is trying to, follow the Vedas, but trying to enjoy the spiritual world at the same time. He does a little mistake, and it's easy for him to commit sinful activity, because it's such the chances of committing sinful activities are so close to, because he wants to enjoy the world, but he can do it in a pious way, but he does it wrongly, and it becomes impious and therefore sinful. So his chances of committing sinful activities is very close to his activity of self-realization. But there's very little progress of self-realization there. There's the Jnani, he's further away from a chance of committing sinful activities. But the Bhakta, the devotee, is the most further away from a chance of committing sinful activity, because he's just engaged in developing his love for Krishna. If a devotee is simply engaged in the 9 processes of bhakti, where's the chance of incurring sin, of doing something abominable? It's when he sometimes deviates from the path of bhakti, that's when he does something abominable. But the activities themselves of bhakti, how can they're these activities that are meant just to developing your love for Krishna, how can that be sinful in any way? There's a karmi who's doing, yagyas, or for example, he wants to eat meat according to the Vedic conclusion, or by following the scriptures. He has to do it at the right time, in the proper way. If he doesn't do it in the proper way, then, he incurs sin. There's a devotee who's simply engaged in activities that are liberating and are full of spiritual prowess. So how can you commit sinful activity? So there's the general process that one graduates from being a karmi to a jnani, and then gradually progresses to be a bhakta. That's the general procedure. But when one receives costless mercy from another devotee, or from Krishna, who gives one a guru, then he can directly access to bhakti. Whereas one can go step by step, or you can take the elevator. So bhakti is like the elevator of self-realization, and by the mercy of Guru and Krishna, we attain, although we may be disqualified, Krishna becomes our sponsor, or a spiritual master becomes our sponsor, and we can attain high levels of self-realization that we would not be able to do on our own. And I'm quoting here, since the Lord is omnipotent, since the omnipotent Lord is situated within the heart of everyone, he can give directions to sincere devotees by which they can attain the right path. Such directions are especially offered to the devotee, even if he desires something else. Even if the devotee desires something else, even if he doesn't fully want Krishna. But there's enough of him that wants Krishna. As far as others are concerned, God gives sanction to the doer only at the risk of the doer. Okay, God says, you want to do that? Okay, fine, I'll give you what you want. But in the case of the devotee, the Lord directs the devotee in such a way that he never acts wrongly. Even if he acts against Vedic direction, he has at once rectified within the heart. So the Lord rectifies within. We all commit mistakes. To err is human, but we don't want to do unintentional sins. We don't want to intentionally do sins. So the sins of the devotee If ever it happens, we don't want it to happen. If ever it happens, it's considered being unintentional. And we should give ourselves up to the Lord, and He will guide us to avoid such pitfalls. But the Lord in Prabhupada says that the devotee takes direction in two ways. Takes direction from Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. I'll explain that. Like it's the triangle of knowledge, I call it. The triangle of the parampara or knowledge. So from the parampara, from the scriptures, that's one way, and from Krishna within the heart. Those are the two ways that Krishna helps the devotee. And they don't contradict each other. Often, like, my little experience in my spiritual life, like I always felt like I felt something, and like the Lord was helping me understand something. But then, the devotees helped me understand it. Reading the scriptures helped me confirm it. Sometimes you're meditating on something, and then you read it, like it's dynamic. These scriptures are dynamic. You read it, so yeah, that's what I need to hear. That's what I need to understand. Or the guru says something, or the sadhu says something. So all of these, they help each other. The Lord within the heart helps your realization, but also internally helps and externally helps with the association of devotees in the scriptures. So what is this triangle of knowledge I was saying is Shastra, which is scripture, Guru, and Sadhu. So just like any, let's say, a university, okay, there is the institution, there is a book, your manual that you're reading, and your teacher. All of them, and you retain knowledge with this triangle there, with this triangle of knowledge. So the same thing in spiritual life, you have the scriptures, you have Guru who's teaching the scripture, but then you have Sadhu also. Sadhu is the community of devotees. It's like the institution, the larger tradition. So all these three are there. They all kind of preserve each other. And all help each other. So we take guidance from that. And Vedic knowledge is not mundane education. We understand Vedic knowledge through realization, which comes from our sincerity, but mainly from a guru and Krishna's mercy. Now, by their mercy, we can understand. Like, that's why Krishna consciousness is sometimes considered like a confidential, it's like a secret. Well, the key to the secret is having love for Krishna, because Krishna gives you that understanding within your heart, so that the purports of the scriptures become revealed in your heart and you start understanding them. And I'm going to conclude with this thing that Prabhupada concludes with and explains the process of bhakti. It starts by hearing and chanting. And this is from the Bhagavatam, the beginning of the Bhagavatam, this second chapter of the first canto of Bhagavatam. It's a very nice progress of a person in bhakti, a devotee, how he progresses by hearing and chanting. So hearing and chanting the glories of the Lord is itself an act of piety. The Lord wants everyone to hear and chant his glories, because he's the well-wisher of all entities. By hearing and chanting, because the Lord, one becomes more elevated in spiritual life. So it starts with Krishna Katha, like we're having now, Krishna Katha, and unwanted things in our heart, they go away. We all have experience of that. Our lives improve in so many ways because unwanted things in our heart goes away, and we become more fixed in devotional service, and we start developing wonderful qualities by doing that. Peaceful, all the Brahminical qualifications Prabhupada mentions there, by engaging in the simple act of Krishna Katha. And the effects of passion and ignorance, they completely vanquish the more and more we get absorbed in that. And then we have full enlightenment, and we know the path, and we can attain Krishna by just hearing and chanting about him. And all our doubts are vanquished, and we become a pure devotee. That's how Prabhupada concludes there. The process that just by hearing and chanting. So that concludes it. That we sorry, I went a little bit over time here. So it concludes that we, by the mercy of the Lord, we receive it by hearing chanting about Him and by being sincere, and then gradually all our path is going to become clearer of obstacles. It's going to become clearer. We'll see it more, and also there'll be less bumps on it, and we just have to keep going. I hope that was helpful. Any questions or comments?
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David. No, that was great. They're such complex. Both those mantras are so deep. The especially 18 is like just it's beautiful too, right? Like they're both such beautiful mantras as well. But it's funny. It again, it reminds me. I hadn't read it. I'd been so busy, so I was catching up this week, and I hadn't read it when we started talking. And it makes me think again about the Om Piva Tra Pavitro Va. That whole prayer just about whether pure or impure, right? Looking at the lotus feet of the Lord, it'll clean me, right? So it's kind of the same thing. It's like I said, I feel like one of the big things is like on that chart that you have is like as you progress, I feel like those big mistakes, they don't like dwell in your mind the same way. You kind of get back to like straight to the routines and the path of bhakti. It's like I used to really get dwelt on if I made a mistake or something like that. And I find it's like I'm more forgiving of myself than I used to be. So it was seeing it visually like that. I'm also a visual person, so it made a lot of sense when I wasn't really sure. And then when you put the big mistake outlier in there, I was like, yes, I agree. Thank you so much, Harry Bull.
And that's the thing in bhakti is that, we are imperfect, but let's focus on the good we're doing. Let's just increase, the hearing and chanting we're doing. Let's increase our absorption in our service, or any of the process of bhakti, and that will help us instead of dwelling on how imperfect we are. Great, thank you for that. I mean, a devotee, of course, a devotee is humble, and he has sentiments where he does like. It's not. It's good to also be shameful. It's also good, It's a good mood, and that's what the mood here's in this verse is that kind of like forgive me, my Lord, and that's a nice mood, and the devotee should have. But at the same time, he should not be discouraged. That's the main point. A devotee should never be discouraged from the path of bhakti.
Well, something really sticks with me right from the beginning. It was one of your early classes talking about, I believe it was Anarta, and it was like the cleansing of the heart. You were saying, I remember you were talking about it like a dirty mirror that you're like cleaning, and it's like the same kind of idea with like the cleaning our heart from all this like the sense gratification and the tying to the material world, right? And it's like this slow cleaning of it, and it's the things don't grasp the same way they used to. They don't attach to the heart as much as they used to. But it's something I think about all the time. I think about that when one of the classes, that specific example.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for taking it so wholeheartedly. You've been on this. We've been covering the Bhagavatam, the Isopanisad there, and wholeheartedly. So thank you very much.